afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Spurs Up. As always, I'm Jack Taylor, but this time I'm joined again by my old co-host, Matt Bumbaca. Matt, thank you for coming on today.
Of course.
Derek was out of office, but we'll see him next week. And today we are joined by a very special guest, Dr. Rod Walters. Dr. Walters was the assistant athletic director focusing on sports medicine here at the University of South Carolina in 1990, and is one of the leading experts in the business, and he even had a large amount of involvement with the recent Maryland case that kind of swept the NCAA. So Dr. Walters, thank you so much for coming on today.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you. To start off, we're going to ask, just a couple questions about your, beginning of your career. Or what I read in your bio, you've been doing this since sophomore year of high school when you were a student trainer, for the athletic program there. Then you got your start at Lenoir-Rhyne, working there, and then Appalachian State until you got here in 1990. So talk a little bit about what kind of got you into the business.
When I graduated from college, I wanted to stay in the collegiate work, and it was really hard to find a job. And then where I could do that, I had a situation where I could go to a high school, but I really wanted to stay in college. So I went to Lenoir-Rhyne College, loved it, stayed there, started working on my doctorate, finished my doctorate halfway through, I got halfway through that work at Lenoir-Rhyne. Then when I went to Appalachian after 5 years, I finished my doctorate there. But when I went to Appalachian, it was back home to where I'd gone, and it was a tough job, maybe one of the toughest I had, because I wasn't seen as a staff member, as more as that student that had moved up, and it's that was tough. But we really had a great athletic administration at the time. Jim Garner and of course Sparky Woods was the head football coach there, and Sparky had great success there. We had several conference championships, and then he came to South Carolina, and then the year he came here, they had the steroid situation exposure at South Carolina, and that created a lot of job positions, openings here, and so I had the opportunity to come to the University of South Carolina, and I never looked back. It was great. 2 years later, we're in the SEC, and so I loved the time I had. I think just the 17 years here was tremendous.
So you were actually a part of the staff before South Carolina joined the SEC. I didn't even realize that as far as the timing went around.
Yep.
That's really interesting.
So it was, and then I tell you, I was talking to one of my former supervisors, Dr. John Moore, this past weekend, and when you look at the budgets back in those days, $20 million to $25 million to $140 million now plus, and it's amazing the growth. But when you get away from downtown Columbia and come back in 6 months, you see a lot of development. And I mean, the SEC has been very good for college athletics. It's been very good for the University of South Carolina.
Oh yeah, and speaking about that development, how much further do you see sports science continuing to grow with the technology that's coming out and all of that?
Excellent question, Matt. I think it's going to continue to grow. I really do. I think it's medicine and science is just evolving so much. I'm a firm believer that we need to keep medicine overseeing sports medicine. A lot of places are going to a sport performance model. I have concern about that. I do think the medical model is a very good model. I always worked with great physicians. The physicians oversaw the work we did as athletic trainers. But I do think that's going to continue to grow. I mean, when you look at the science and you look at how things are evolving, it's really tremendous.
Yeah.
Now, normally when you think of, Hall of Fames, especially when it comes to collegiate athletics, you think of, NCAA Hall of Fame, Basketball Hall of Fame, but you were actually inducted to the National Athletic Trainers Association Hall of Fame in 2005. Talk a little bit about what that meant to you.
That was a seminal moment. It was a very humbling experience. Nobody that goes in feels like you're worthy, and then when you get there, you find out that there's a lot of people feel the same way. I had so many people that helped me get there. I mean, I've had some tremendous staffs, tremendous students, great athletes that you work with through the years, great coaches, great administrators. And I love what I do. I love what I did in college athletics. And I told my wife, when I don't love it anymore is when I'm going to make a move. And that's what I did in February of 2017, when I decided, or 2007, excuse me, when I decided to go into the consulting business on a full-time basis. So that was a very humbling experience, one I'm very proud of.
That's great. Now, with injuries obviously being a part of sports, they're always going to happen. What was the worst injury that you experienced at a sporting event that you witnessed?
It didn't get much worse than cardiac arrest. We were doing a preseason evaluation of football, SEC football officials, which I coordinated back in the 90s, and one of our officials had a cardiac arrest, but at the same time we brought him back because we had a good emergency action plan. We had great people that were part of that right there, and we had a great, a great outcome on that. You see some pretty, significant injuries, cervical spine, but you always try to practice. We tried to practice. We tried to be prepared. Today I think the emergency action plan is like, I tell people it's the low-hanging fruit, but in the work that I do now as an expert witness in evaluating programs, the emergency action plan is a big part of it because I think it's a basic tenet of care. You've got to have a good plan.
Yeah.
Failing the plan is planning to fail, and there's a lot of people that do that.
Now, how do staffs practice those plans beforehand?
You basically, you have a written plan, so you have a written protocol, you post it, and then we have what we call venue specific. So every site should have a emergency action plan. And then you basically walk through that. You go through that and you talk about I call it role delineation. What's everybody's responsibility? Who's going to activate EMS? Who's providing care? Who goes and meets the ambulance? So all those things are important. And any one of those steps that breaks down, that's where you have failure. So we have to have a plan. So, and it's really detailed. We'll practice that, quarterly, annually, monthly, weekly, however much we need to. I did some work with Cirque du Soleil last year. They practiced 90 minutes a week on their emergency action plan.
That's good.
So, it's according to your place. If you ask a question, and I do this in a seminar, how often do you practice your emergency action plan? Most people say we practice it in July, and I think that's not nearly enough. It should be quarterly, maybe monthly, according to your need.
Exactly.
So we'd be remiss, if we didn't ask about the recent case when it came to the Maryland football player and the, scandal that kind of surrounded that. You were one of the leading experts on that case and that investigation. Talk about how the NCAA or whoever was, leading that investigation came to you and approached you about it.
Several years ago, I did some work at Towson University where there's another heat stroke there. And one of the administrators at Maryland was at Towson at the time, so she knew my name. We had worked together there. Damon Evans, former athletic director at University of Georgia, was the interim athletic director at Maryland. So he had comfort with me. He knew what kind of work I had done at the University of South Carolina. And so when this incident happened, they reached out, RFP and that type thing. So we did a proposal to them and then just started working on that.
Because as we said before, you are the president and leader of Walters Incorporated. You run that yourself, and you do concussion spotting work with the NFL and primarily with the Falcons, I believe, if that's correct. So starting off with that, how did you get involved with that?
One of my former students, Danny Long, is with the Falcons, and they had an opening there, and he called and asked would I be interested or would I consider that. And so I had an interview with the NFL, and then they offered the position. So I guess I've been doing that 7 years now. So,
really?
Yeah. So it's a fairly well-oiled machine now, the NFL protocol. So it's gotten.
So how hands-on do you have to be?
Very much. Well, hands-on in that I'm an observer.
Okay.
So my location is in the press box. So it's a lot better at the new stadium than it was the old stadium.
Oh, I bet.
The sight lines are tremendous. The video is tremendous. So I'm watching the game, and I want to see if I see someone that has concussive symptoms. And the point we do, if we see concussive symptoms, not big hits, but concussive symptoms, we make a call to the head athletic trainer or whoever the designee is for that team. And they have to go check that player and put him in the concussion protocol. And so if he's cleared, they tell us that we didn't see anything. The independent neurologist or neurosurgeon would see that person, and then we would return them to play. But there's a set protocol now that we have to do. So every person that's we identified and put in the protocol has to be evaluated. The video must be reviewed. They got to see what we see. The concern is like the Colt McCoy situation when he got hit that time with the Browns. He got hit by a Steeler, and he comes off the field, and they said, what's wrong? They didn't see him get hit. They were dealing with another athlete. When he came off the field, he said, my hand hurts. Well, he'd gotten hit pretty significantly and was, exhibiting symptoms, needed to be evaluated for concussion. He didn't know that. He's complaining about his hand. They evaluate his hand, send him back into play, and that's when he really expressed symptoms in, And so the NFL got very, very concerned because this is when they were getting a lot of media attention.
Yeah.
And this was the straw that broke the camel's back. So that's when they started putting people, the spotters in the booth. So the point is now we have to call down, even though you see them looking at somebody, we're going to call and say, make sure that you're looking at, he exhibited concussive-like symptoms. So it's a medical program in the NFL. It's directed by the chief medical officer now. So there's good buy-in. It was a little bit of resistance at the start, but now it's very good buy-in from the teams and across the board.
That's good. And in your 7 years, how much have you seen it evolve, and how much more elaborate do you think the protocol is going to get in years to come?
I think, Matt, as you said, we were talking earlier, you asked about technology. As technology grows, we find out more things. We're having more tests. The test that we do today on concussions is much greater than it was when I started speaking about these topics, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And as you see it grow, it just gets more and more involved. So I think that's going to definitely happen. We've got some great tests today. We have some great information, but we have to use that information. We can't just, put it on a shelf. So I do think that's going to grow.
And I think that's been one of the bigger issues, especially with the NFL, is having the information, finding it, and then once you get that, actually implementing it and using it. I mean, you've seen some of the things that they've tried, new technologies they try to see, different helmets, different styles, or even, I'm sure you've seen it twice a year working with the Falcons. Luke Kuechly, linebacker for the Carolina Panthers, and the collar that he wears to kind of keep his neck stabilized, because he's had, I think, 2 concussions in the past 3 years. So I definitely think that implementing that technology.
You got to remember, equipment does not prevent concussions. Helmets don't prevent concussions.
No.
The salesmen want to tell us that, or they want to try to tell the coaches that, but the bottom line is it doesn't. Helmets protect skull fractures. Helmets prevent tissue damage like that. We got to mitigate forces. If we can't do the same thing we've been doing, expect different results. Einstein said that's the definition of insanity. So we've got to change how we're looking. I think what Pete Carroll's doing with the Seattle Seahawks is really good. The rugby tackle. I think limiting contact. We've gone down to 1 day a week of contact. We have schools now that have really mitigated a lot of contact force, and we're seeing changes in these people's brains. We also see people that have a significant contact having severe changes in their brain, which is not a positive thing. So we've got to look at those things, and I think the concept of a pitch count for the brain is really good to limit contact. When Coach Spurrier was here, he didn't contact near as much as Lou Holtz did. So when you look at practices, we have to look at those things, because we got to mitigate the forces. That's significant.
And you wrote the concussion protocol for the Big 12. And what is that like? How is that different from the NFL's concussion protocol or anything like that?
The NFL had a protocol. I just implemented the plan to provide the care. So I worked on behalf of Texas Health Sports Medicine out of Fort Worth, Texas, who got the contract with the Big 12. So they hired me to come in, and it's the biggest difference is it was mandated by the athletic directors, not the medical people. So there's a little bit of pushback. We don't have a ability to review right now. We're looking at changing that for 2019. As far as on the sidelines, they actually they can review the videos. It's not a mandatory review. So we're trying to make some suggestions to them, or they've come up with some suggestions of things that they can do. Big 12's been very good. I want to say the Big 12 is as progressive as anybody in college athletics. They have the video on the sidelines. We have the ability to stop the game. The problem is there's not a consistent protocol for concussion administration across the 5 power conferences. So when the SEC plays the Big 12, we have SEC officials in a Big 12 stadium with Big 12 spotters. There's not a consistent. The protocol is different in the Big 12 as it is in the SEC. So without boring all your viewers with all this, I think there is a need. One of my big pushes right now is to get a standard.
Well, you think the NCAA should unify it as one?
It makes too much common sense.
And they have done that consistently, where they, instead of having one ruling over all the leagues, they just let each conference do.
And that's kind of where it is now. And I think the problem is now with bowl games, you don't have a consistency. With the preseason games, you don't have consistency. I would just love to see a consistent administration. I think how they handle concussions, that's the institution's responsibility. That's their purview. I am not trying to change that at all or influence that at all. But I would like to see us have a consistent way that we administer these.
So jumping back to the NFL, the Super Bowl this past year was in the new Superdome, and so were you in attendance for that? Were you working that?
Yep, I did have the opportunity to work that. So I was a lead spotter for the Super Bowl, and that was quite an experience. You know, one of the people, I was able to select one of the people from my team there, and then we had another wild card, so to speak, come in. So you realize that in a normal game, there are 2 spotters in the booth, and then we have 2 techs in the booth that kind of run the software for us. Then we have 2 techs on the sidelines, and then we have 3 neurosurgeons that are also all NFL employees. So we don't work for the teams, we work for the NFL. So there's a standard protocol consistent. And again, I'm very proud of that program and what they've done with that.
All right.
Thank you again so much, sir. That's about all we have for you today. Again, thanks for coming on. This was a fantastic interview. It was
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
A lot of pleasure here. But until next time, Tatiana.
Spurs up.